We journey into the secret bedrooms of history, where forbidden passion toppled thrones and the whispers of lovers redrew the map of the world. We begin with a royal love affair so consuming, so obsessive, that it didn't just break a queen's heart, it broke an entire country from the most powerful institution on earth. Imagine a king, a titan of his age, a man whose every whim was law. For 2 decades, he had been married to a devoted, noble queen. But then his eyes fell upon a woman so captivating, so intelligent, and so dangerously ambitious that he would risk his throne, his soul, and the stability of his kingdom just to possess her. This wasn't merely a king seeking a new wife. This was an inferno of desire that would burn down 1,000 years of tradition. The woman was Anne Boleyn, and the king was Henry VIII. Their love affair would not just create a scandal. It would create a new church, spark a revolution, and leave a trail of blood and betrayal that echoes through the centuries. Their story proves that sometimes the most earth-shattering political changes begin not in a war room, stolen glance across a crowded court. But before we dive headfirst into the story that turned England upside down and inside out, I have a question for you. Ready to unravel these historical scandals? Or are you multitasking, listening to these tales of passion and power while conquering your daily chores? Drop a comment below and let me know where you're tuning in from. I love knowing that we're sharing these unbelievable moments together, no matter where you are in the world. And if these stories are already sending shivers down your spine, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button like it's a royal decree. Your support is the fuel that keeps these historical fires burning. Let's get back to a court where love was the most dangerous game of all. The king's great matter, Henry VIII and Anne Boleyn. When Henry VIII met Anne Boleyn in the early 1520s, he was not the bloated, tyrannical figure we often picture. He was in his prime, charismatic, athletic, and considered one of the most handsome princes in Europe. He was also a deeply religious man, trapped in a political marriage to Catherine of Aragon. Catherine had been a loyal wife, but she had failed to produce what Henry craved above all else, a male heir to secure the Tudor dynasty. This wasn't just a personal desire, it was a national obsession. The Wars of the Roses, a brutal civil war over succession, were still a fresh and painful memory. Without a son, England could easily plunge back into chaos. Into this pressurized environment walked Anne Boleyn. She was not a conventional beauty by Tudor standards, olive-skinned, with eyes so bewitching they were said to be her greatest feature. But what truly set her apart was her mind. Having spent her formative years in the sophisticated courts of France, she was witty, educated, and possessed a confident, almost arrogant charm that was utterly intoxicating. Unlike the demure English ladies of the court, and didn't just blush and curtsy. She challenged, she debated. She flirted with an intelligence that matched the king's own. Henry was instantly smitten. He likely saw her as another conquest. He had a reputation for taking mistresses, including Anne's own sister. He offered in the position of his official mistress, a role that came with titles, wealth, and influence. Any other woman would have accepted immediately, and, in a move of breathtaking audacity, refused. She told the King of England that she would give her heart to him, but her body she would save for her husband. This refusal was a spark that lit the fuse. Henry, a man who had never been denied anything, his desire for her morphed into an all-consuming need that blurred the lines between love, lust, and political ambition. He wrote her a series of passionate, almost desperate love letters. He calls her my own darling and pledges his unwavering devotion, writing, "Henceforth, my heart shall be dedicated to you alone," and had played her hand brilliantly. She knew that the king's desire for a son and his infatuation with her could be combined into a powerful weapon. She suggested a path that was almost unthinkable. Henry could divorce his wife, Catherine, and marry her instead. She would give him the son he so desperately needed. The idea took root in Henry's mind and became what history now calls the king's great matter. What followed was a 7-year struggle that tore England apart. Henry sought an annulment from the Pope, arguing that his marriage to Catherine was invalid because she had been his brother's widow, a union forbidden by biblical law. The Pope, however, was effectively a prisoner of Catherine's nephew, the Holy Roman Emperor Charles V, the most powerful man in Europe. He refused to grant the annulment. The political and religious battle, the pressure on him was immense. She was despised by the public, who saw her as a scheming homewrecker and called her the king's whore. She was a sworn enemy of the powerful Queen Catherine and her supporters. Through it all, she held firm, her ambition matched only by the king's obsession. Driven to the edge by his desire, Henry made a decision that would change the course of Western history. If the Pope would not grant him his wish, he would simply break away from the authority of the Pope. In 1534, with the Act of Supremacy, Henry VIII declared himself the supreme head of the Church of England. He severed ties with Rome that had stood for 1,000 years, dissolved the monasteries, and seized their immense wealth. He didn't do this for theological reasons. He did it for love, or at least for the woman he had convinced himself was the key to his happiness and his dynasty's future. In 1533, they married in secret. She was crowned Queen of England in a lavish ceremony, but her triumph was short-lived. The child she was carrying, the child for whom Henry had overturned a kingdom, it was a daughter, Elizabeth. The birth of a healthy daughter was a crushing disappointment. One seemingly unassailable was now precarious. She had promised a son and failed to deliver. She had 2 subsequent miscarriages, and with each failure, Henry's love, once a blazing fire, began to cool into bitter resentment. The captivating wit he had once admired now seemed like nagging insolence, which had once charmed him, now felt like a threat. Henry's eye began to wander to a new face at court, the quiet and gentle Jane Seymour, and was no longer the object of his desire, but the obstacle to it. In a stunning and brutal reversal, the king who had moved heaven and earth to marry her now needed to be rid of her. But divorce was complicated, and execution was much cleaner. In 1536, Anne Boleyn was arrested on trumped-up charges of adultery, incest, and treason. She was accused of taking multiple lovers, including her own brother, and of plotting to kill the king. The evidence was flimsy, likely coerced through torture, but the verdict was a foregone conclusion. The woman who had flown so high was brought crashing down with terrifying speed. On May 19, 1536, she was executed on Tower Green, maintaining her innocence and dignity. Just 11 days later, Henry married Jane Seymour. Anne Boleyn's love affair. Henry VIII is a chilling tale of how quickly absolute power can turn obsessive love into deadly hatred. She was a woman of incredible ambition and intelligence who played the Game of Thrones and, for a time, but in the end, the very passion that had elevated her to the throne became the instrument of her destruction. Her legacy, however, was the daughter she left behind, who would become one of England's greatest monarchs, proving that a queen could rule just as powerfully as any king. The she-wolf of France, Isabella and Edward II, while Anne Boleyn used love as a ladder to power, our next queen used it as a weapon of mass destruction. Travel back with us to the 14th century, to a court simmering with intrigue and a love story so toxic it would culminate in a gruesome murder and the overthrow of a king. This is the story of Isabella of France, a woman so formidable, so cunning, and so utterly ruthless that her enemies called her the she-wolf of France. And trust me, she earned that name. A 12-year-old Isabella, daughter of the powerful King of France, arrived in England to marry King Edward II. It was a standard political alliance, designed to bring peace between 2 warring nations. Isabella was renowned for her beauty and intelligence. She was a prized diplomatic asset. Edward should have been overjoyed. But Edward had a secret so all-consuming that it would overshadow his marriage, his reign, and ultimately, his life. Edward II was desperately in love with a man named Piers Gaveston. This wasn't a discreet affair. Edward's infatuation with Gaveston was public, scandalous, and obsessive. He showered his favorite with titles, lands, and jewels that rightfully belonged to the established English nobility. On his own wedding day to Isabella, Edward reportedly ignored his beautiful young bride to lavish attention on Gaveston, even giving him the jewels that Isabella's father had gifted for the wedding. The humiliation for the young queen was profound and public. Foreign ambassadors wrote home in shock. Imagine being a teenage princess, alone in a foreign country, only to be utterly cast aside by your new husband for his male lover on the first night of your marriage. Isabella endured this public disgrace with a quiet, watchful patience. Most medieval queens would have resigned themselves to a life of quiet piety and childbearing. But Isabella was forged from different steel. She was not a passive victim. She was a political predator. She watched the English barons grow increasingly furious with Gaveston's influence. They weren't necessarily scandalized by the king's same-sex relationship. Such arrangements were not unheard of, but they were enraged that a low-born foreigner was effectively ruling their country, treating them with contempt and draining the royal treasury. The nobles forced Edward to exile Gaveston not once. Each time, Edward, lovesick and petulant, would find a way to bring him back, fueling the fires of rebellion. Isabella, meanwhile, was playing the long game. She built alliances with the disgruntled nobles, learned the intricate workings of the English court, and gave the king what he needed most, the future Edward III, by providing an heir. She secured her own position and gave the barons an alternative focus for their loyalty. The turning point came in 1312. The enraged barons, led by the powerful Earl of Lancaster, captured Piers Gaveston, and without a trial, he was consumed by grief and a burning desire for revenge against the men who had murdered his lover. But instead of turning to his wife for comfort and counsel, he found a new favorite, Hugh Despenser the Younger. If Gaveston had been arrogant, Despenser was a tyrant. He and his father used their influence over the grieving king to launch a reign of terror, extorting money and eliminating anyone who stood in their way. They turned on Queen Isabella, persuading Edward to confiscate her lands and reduce her household, effectively making her a prisoner in her own court. They thought they could neutralize the Queen of England. They had just signed their own death warrants. In 1325, Isabella saw her chance. A dispute had arisen with her brother over English territories, convinced Edward to send her to Paris to negotiate. It was a brilliant move. Once safely back on French soil, surrounded by her family and allies, the mask of the dutiful wife dropped. She was there not to make peace, but to raise an army, and in France, she found a perfect partner in crime and in passion, Roger Mortimer, an exiled English baron who had a personal vendetta against the Despensers. Mortimer was everything Edward wasn't: a brilliant military strategist, a ruthless politician, and a charismatic leader. The chemistry between the scorned queen and the exiled rebel was electric. They became lovers, and their political alliance was sealed by a white-hot passion. They were unstoppable. They hatched an audacious plan, an invasion of England, not as foreign conquerors, but as liberators. Isabella would use her legitimacy as queen in the presence of her son, whom she had cleverly summoned to France, to justify the invasion. She declared she was acting to save the kingdom and her son from the evil tyranny of the Despensers. In 1326, Isabella and Mortimer landed in England with a small mercenary army. The response was overwhelming. The English, sick of the Despensers' greed and Edward's disastrous rule, the king's regime crumbled almost without a fight. It was a brutal reckoning. Hugh Despenser the Younger was captured and subjected to one of the most gruesome executions in England. He was publicly hanged, drawn, and quartered, a terrifying message to anyone who dared to cross the she-wolf. With Despenser gone, there was still the matter of the king. Isabella did something no English queen had ever done before. She forced her own husband to abdicate the throne in favor of their son. The teenage king was a puppet. The true rulers of England were now Queen Isabella. But what happened to deposed King Edward II? The official story is that he died of natural causes in captivity at Berkeley Castle a few months later. But sinister rumors have persisted for centuries, whispers of a horrifying murder so personal and cruel it could only have been ordered by someone who wanted ultimate, intimate revenge. One popular, though unproven, account claims he was killed by having a red-hot poker inserted into his bowels, symbolic death for a king condemned for his unnatural affections. Isabella and Mortimer ruled England for 4 years, but their reign, born of scandal, ended in it. Their blatant affair and greedy consolidation of power alienated their allies. In 1330, the young King Edward III, no longer willing to be his mother's pawn, he had Mortimer captured and executed as a traitor, the she-wolf of France. Her son showed her mercy. She was not executed, but forced into a comfortable retirement, living out her days in luxury. She had risen from a humiliated child bride to the most powerful woman in England, all fueled by a desire for vengeance against a husband who had scorned her. Her story is a terrifying testament to the old. Hell hath no fury like a queen scorned. The imperial partnership, Catherine the Great and Grigory Potemkin. From a queen who destroyed her husband for love, we turn to an empress whose greatest love affair became the secret engine of her empire. Our next story takes us to the glittering, dangerous core of 18th century Russia, and to a romance so powerful, so equal, and so politically consequential that it defies all stereotypes of a monarch and her lover. This is the story of Catherine the Great and Grigory Potemkin, a partnership that was as much about building an empire as it was about personal passion. Catherine the Great was not born to rule Russia. She was a minor German princess, born Sophie, who arrived in Russia at the age of 15 to marry the heir to the throne, the deeply unstable and unpopular Peter III. Like Isabella of France, Catherine found herself in a loveless political marriage with a husband she despised. But where Peter was weak and foolish, Catherine was brilliant, ambitious, and a master of political strategy. Within 6 months of Peter becoming Tsar, Catherine, with the help of the military and her then-lover Grigory Orlov, Peter was forced to abdicate and was conveniently murdered shortly thereafter. At the age of 33, The German princess had made herself Catherine II, empress and autocrat of all the Russias. Catherine had a healthy appetite for love and took many lovers throughout her long reign. But one man would rise above all the others to become her partner in every sense of the word. His name was Grigory Potemkin. Potemkin was a force of nature, a brilliant, one-eyed giant of a man known for his intelligence, his wild moods, his strategic genius, and his unbridled ambition. He was one of the officers who had helped Catherine seize the throne, and their connection was immediate and profound. Their passionate affair began in 1774, and it was a meeting of equals. In their secret letters, which reveal one of the most remarkable romances in history, they were not empress and subject. They were Katia and Grisha, two intellectual and political titans who had found their match. You have inflamed my soul. I cannot live a single hour without you. Potemkin, for his part, was unafraid to challenge her and to love her with fierce, possessive passion. My empress, my beloved, there is no happiness for me without you. All my desires, all my dreams are of you. There is strong evidence that they were secretly married. Catherine frequently refers to Potemkin as her husband and to herself as his wife. Such a marriage would have been a political bombshell, an empress marrying one of her own subjects. But their bond transcended official titles. He was the only one of her lovers who was ever allowed to address her with such intimacy and who shared in the actual governance of the Russian Empire. Their physical affair lasted only a couple of years, but their partnership endured until his death. This is what makes their story so unique. When their passion cooled, they did not become bitter enemies. Instead, they transformed their relationship into the most powerful political alliance in Europe. Potemkin remained her most trusted advisor, her chief minister, and her dearest friend. In a truly astonishing arrangement, Potemkin even began to vet and approve Catherine's new, younger lovers. He would select handsome, intelligent young officers for her, guide them on how to please the empress, and then dismiss them when they became too arrogant or their affair had run its course. It was a bizarre, yet pragmatic, system that ensured Catherine had companionship, while Potemkin retained his unique position as her ultimate confidant and co-ruler. It was he who held the true power, the man behind the empress's bedroom door. They were an unstoppable force. Potemkin was the architect of Catherine's grandest ambitions. His greatest achievement was the conquest and colonization of the southern territories, including Crimea. He founded cities like Sevastopol and Kherson, built the Black Sea Fleet from scratch, and pacified the vast, wild steppes, transforming them into productive parts of the Russian Empire. This expansion was a shared dream, planned and executed in their intimate correspondence. When Catherine made her famous journey to Crimea in 1787 to inspect her new territories, it was Potemkin who orchestrated the entire spectacular affair. This journey gave rise to the myth of the Potemkin villages, portable villages allegedly built to fool Catherine into thinking the region was more prosperous than it was. While the story is a gross exaggeration, a piece of political propaganda spread by his enemies, it speaks to the sheer scale of Potemkin's vision and his reputation as a master of spectacle. Their relationship was the engine of the Russian state. They argued over policy, celebrated military victories together, and comforted each other in times of doubt. When Potemkin was away on campaign, Catherine's letters were filled with longing and anxiety. Do not risk your precious life. Remember that my life is bound to yours. When Potemkin died suddenly in 1791 while on campaign, Catherine was utterly devastated. Her grief was not for a former lover, but for the loss of the other half of her soul. Great sorrow has befallen me, my pupil, my friend, my idol, Prince Potemkin of Taurida. Now I am all alone. The Russian court was stunned by the depth of her grief. She secluded herself for weeks, and many believed she would never recover. The empire had lost not just a great statesman, but one of its two secret rulers. The love affair of Catherine the Great and Grigory Potemkin was a scandal not but because of its unprecedented equality. It was a relationship that defied the rigid hierarchies of the 18th century. They were lovers, spouses, friends, and co-conspirators who ruled an empire together. Their partnership demonstrates that a royal love affair doesn't always have to be about destruction or betrayal. Sometimes, in the crucible of absolute power, it can forge an alliance more powerful and more productive than any formal treaty. The Crown and the Crisis, Edward VIII and Wallis Simpson. From an empress who shared her power with her lover, we now turn to a king who gave it all away for his. Our next story is perhaps the most famous royal scandal of the 20th century, a constitutional crisis wrapped in a love story that pitted the ancient duties of a monarch against the modern desires of a man. This is the story of King Edward VIII and Wallis Simpson. The affair that forced a king to choose between his crown and the woman he loved shook the British Empire to its very foundations. When Prince Edward, known to his family as David, met Wallis Simpson in 1931, he was the world's most eligible bachelor. As the Prince of Wales, he was handsome, charming, and the heir to a global empire upon which the sun never set. He was a global celebrity, a fashion icon, and the future king. He was a deeply unhappy man, suffocated by the rigid protocols of royal life and desperate for a connection that felt real. Wallis Simpson was everything the British aristocracy was not. She was an American, a commoner, and, most scandalously of all, she was on her second marriage to shipping executive Ernest Simpson. She wasn't a conventional beauty, but she was whip-smart, stylish, and possessed a sharp, confident wit that Edward found utterly intoxicating. She treated him not as the heir to the throne, but as a man. She was unimpressed by his title, and this, for a man who had been deferred to his entire life, was an irresistible challenge. Their affair began, and Edward fell head over heels in a way that alarmed everyone around him. This wasn't a discreet dalliance. It was a total, all-consuming obsession. He showered her with extravagant jewels and money, took her on lavish holidays, and introduced her into high society, ignoring the fact that she was another man's wife. The royal court and the British government were aghast. They saw Wallis as a scheming, ambitious adventuress who had the future king wrapped around her little finger. The situation was a ticking time bomb, and in January 1936, it exploded. King George V died, and Edward ascended the throne as King Edward VIII. His private affair was a matter of state. Wallis was in the process of divorcing her second husband, and Edward made his intentions clear. He was determined to marry her. The Church of England and the royal family was united in its opposition. The idea of the king, who was also the supreme governor of the Church of England, marrying a twice-divorced American commoner was simply unthinkable. The church did not recognize divorce, and for the king to marry a woman with two living ex-husbands would be a moral and constitutional catastrophe. Prime Minister Stanley Baldwin laid out the stark choice, if Edward insisted on marrying Wallis, triggering a political crisis that could shatter the monarchy. The public, largely kept in the dark by a deferential British press, had no idea of a storm brewing behind palace walls. But the American and European papers were having a field day, publishing every detail of the scandalous affair. He was king emperor of a quarter of the world's population, but he was not free to marry the woman he loved. For months, a desperate battle of wills raged, and Edward proposed a morganatic marriage, where Wallis would be his wife but not his queen, and their children would have no claim to the throne. The government rejected it. The crisis reached its peak in the winter of 1936. Edward was forced to confront the impossible choice he had been trying to avoid. He could give up Wallis and remain king, living a life of duty without love. Or he could give up the throne, the empire, and his family for her. On December 10th, 1936, after a reign of just 326 days, Edward VIII made his choice. In a poignant and historic radio address broadcast across the globe, he announced his decision to abdicate. His words capture the heart of his dilemma. You must believe me when I tell you that I have found it impossible to carry the heavy burden of responsibility and to discharge my duties as I would wish to do without the help and support of the woman I love. He signed the instrument of abdication. The crown passed his stunned and reluctant younger brother, who became King George VI, the father of the future Queen Elizabeth II, now known as the Duke of Windsor, sailed into exile, a king who had chosen love over duty. He and Wallis married in France the following year. Happily ever after was more complicated. They were largely ostracized by the royal family. Wallis was denied the title of Her Royal Highness, a slight that infuriated Edward for the rest of his life. They lived a glamorous but aimless existence, drifting through international high society, hosting lavish parties, and becoming symbols of a certain kind of gilded exile. The abdication crisis was more than just a royal scandal. It was a defining moment for the modern British monarchy. It established the principle that the monarch's personal desires must be subordinate to their public duty. It also, inadvertently, placed a more suitable and dutiful family on the throne, with his quiet dedication and strong sense of duty, helped restore the monarchy's reputation, and guided Britain through the dark days of World War II. The love story of Edward and Wallis remains one of the great romantic legends of the 20th century. Was it a tale of ultimate devotion, a man sacrificing a global empire for the woman he couldn't live without? Or was it a story of profound selfishness, a king shirking his sacred duty for an unsuitable infatuation? The truth, as always, is likely somewhere in between. What is certain is that their passion forced a seismic shift in the British monarchy, proving that even in the modern age, a forbidden love affair could still have the power to bring a king to his knees and change the line of succession forever. A sacrifice to the system, Princess Margaret and Peter Townsend. If Edward and Wallace's story is about a royal who chose love over the crown, our final tale is its tragic inversion. It's the story of a princess who, faced with the same impossible choice, chose a crown over love, sacrificing her own happiness for the stability of the institution she was born to serve. This is the heartbreaking romance of Princess Margaret and Group Captain Peter Townsend, a love affair that captivated the world and revealed the cold, hard rules that still govern the House of Windsor even after the abdication crisis. Princess Margaret was a glamorous, rebellious younger sister of Queen Elizabeth II. While Elizabeth was dutiful, reserved, and being groomed for the throne, Margaret was vivacious, witty, and possessed a streak of royal glamour that made her a star. She was the life of the party, a fashion icon, and a figure of intense public fascination. Peter Townsend was a decorated Royal Air Force hero from the Battle of Britain. After the war, he was appointed as an equerry, King George VI. He was handsome, quiet, and 16 years older than the princess. He was also a married man with 2 children. As Margaret blossomed from a teenager into a young woman, she and Townsend developed a deep and powerful bond. After Townsend's divorce in 1952, their friendship deepened into a secret. The public got its first inkling of the affair during Queen Elizabeth II's coronation in 1953. A television camera caught a small. As she and Townsend stood waiting, Margaret tenderly brushed a piece of fluff from his uniform. It was a fleeting, almost unconscious moment of affection, but it was enough. The press went into a frenzy. The romance presented the newly crowned Queen Elizabeth with her first major crisis. The parallels to her uncle's abdication were unavoidable and terrifying. Margaret wanted to marry Townsend, but like Wallace Simpson, the Royal Marriages Act of 1772 required that the monarch give permission for the marriage of senior royals. The government, led by Winston Churchill, and the Church of England made their position brutally clear. They would not approve the marriage. If Margaret, then third in line to the throne, married a divorced man, it would create a constitutional crisis and undermine the Queen's position as head of the Church. The establishment, having learned its lesson from the abdication, closed ranks. Townsend was swiftly posted to a diplomatic position in Brussels, effectively exiling him and separating the lovers. The hope was that a 2-year separation would cool their passion. It was a cruel but calculated move designed to protect the monarchy at all costs. For 2 years, Margaret and Townsend endured their separation. Their love story followed avidly by a sympathetic public. The press and the people were largely on their side. Townsend was a war hero, not a shady socialite. This felt different. Many felt the rules were archaic and cruel. The princess was being forced to choose between her duty and her heart. When Townsend returned to England in 1955, the nation held its breath. Would Margaret defy the system? Would she renounce her royal titles and income, leave England, and marry the man she loved? The pressure on her was immense. She was torn between her deep love for Townsend and her profound sense of duty to her sister, the Queen, and the institution she represented. On October 31st, 1955, Princess Margaret made her decision. In a somber statement broadcast by the BBC, she announced that she would not be marrying Peter Townsend. Her words were a poignant echo of her uncle's, but with a heartbreakingly different conclusion. "I would like it to be known," she said, "that I have decided not to marry Group Captain Peter Townsend. I have been aware that, subject to my renouncing my rights of succession, it might have been possible for me to contract a civil marriage. But mindful of the Church's teachings concerning Christian marriage, and conscious of my duty to the Commonwealth, I have resolved to put these considerations before others." She had chosen duty. She had sacrificed her personal happiness for the stability of the monarchy. The decision broke her heart, and many believe she never truly recovered. Townsend, too, was devastated. He later wrote in his memoir, "We had reached the end of the road. Our feelings for one another were unchanged, but they had incurred for us a burden so great that we were no longer able to carry it." Margaret eventually married photographer Anthony Armstrong Jones and embraced a bohemian lifestyle, but the marriage was turbulent and ended in divorce. She remained a glamorous but often melancholic figure, a woman who had been denied her one great love by the unyielding demands of her birth. The story of Margaret and Townsend is a poignant postscript to the age of great royal scandals. It demonstrates that while the world was changing rapidly, the ancient institution of the monarchy still held immense power over the lives of those within it. Unlike her uncle Edward, Margaret was not willing to abandon her family and her country. Her sacrifice reinforced the very principles of duty and service that Edward's abdication had threatened. It was a quiet tragedy, a love story defined not by a dramatic rebellion, but by a solemn, heartbreaking surrender. It served as a powerful reminder that for some, the weight of the crown is a burden that demands the ultimate personal sacrifice, ensuring that the institution survives, even at the cost of a broken heart. From the battlefields of love to the quiet corridors of sacrifice, these stories show us that the hearts of kings and queens are often the first casualties in the unforgiving Game of Thrones.